Live from Western Kentucky University, capital of the Hilltopper Nation. Whether it's in the locker room or on the field, behind the clipboard or on the court, home or away, we've got you covered. Get ready to enter the Red Zone, your destination for all things sports, right here on Revolution 91.7.
Thank you for signing your national letter of intent to come join us here at the Red Zone on this beautiful Wednesday in February, starting off the month strong because we get back to football. Sunny day today. So we're here with Billy Rutledge and Jimmy Stratman on RedZone Radio
Sports.
to talk football for probably the first half, which just makes me so excited, and maybe we'll it in the back half because one of our co-hosts here had a chance to witness himself a game over the weekend. And fellas, WKU had a press conference today at 3 p.m. Jeff Brom announced 15 signees to go along with 5 early enrollees, so 20 new players for the program. Left a few spots open for maybe some transfers, but this class doesn't really jump off the page, but coaches seem to like it.
Yeah, my first thought when seeing the class was a little disappointed. The class last year really had some star players with Wonderful Terry and G Money Brown, and this year they only had one 3-star recruit, according to Rivals.com. But one good thing I did see was 9 players from the state of Kentucky this year. Compared to now, that's 19 in the last 2 years. WKU signed 17 players from the state of Kentucky between 2009 and 2013, and they've signed 19 in these past 2 years. So really some improvement from Brom, getting some players inside the state, kind of building a base, and I think that's what he needs to do with his second year of head coach of the football team.
It's nice to see that they're still staying in the state of Kentucky, but it's also nice to see that they're still branching out. They're still continuing that trend of bringing in players from Florida that Bobby Petrino was really big on when he was here. Like you said, Billy, it's not a very good class on paper, but there's a few bright spots that I found. I was really impressed with some of the defensive linemen that they were able to bring in, linemen, ends, tackles.
Yeah, one of the things that I liked about the linemen, and a couple of them were 3-stars, some of them JUCO, but I liked the size, and obviously haven't seen them in person, but generally what happens with these younger or not as rated guys, not as high-profile guys, you're looking for a guy that's 6'3" or 6'4", 6'5" that you can put some weight on. And they've got certainly some size in this recruiting class, an early enrollee in Sidney Hammond, who's 6'3", 260. But Cullen Reynolds is one of the guys that jumped out at me. He's already the size of Cam Clements. Maybe subtract half an inch, and he's already the size of a senior lineman that just left the offensive tackle position. Give him some time to grow, maybe put on some more weight. And he's an NFL-sized offensive lineman, and that's what I'm looking at because 1-star, 2-star, 3-star, a lot of times with offensive linemen, it just has to do with what their weight program is.
Yeah, and the big thing about this year's recruiting class, the defense need to get better and drastically and very quickly. And another player that I like, Josh, was Tyron Horton. He's a defensive end from Louisville, from DuPont. He's 6'4", 255 pounds. Brom talked about him in the press conference today, said he was an athletic freak. And it's just that's what WKU needs some depth at the defensive line position. I believe it was around 9 total defensive linemen that signed for WKU in this recruiting class. So really getting some depth for this defense that really struggled in the trenches last year.
It was Horton actually that jumped out at me too, but it wasn't necessarily for those stats. I was looking at his tackle stats. Last season, 69 tackles, 42 solo tackles, which I think is a big emphasis that the defense needs to bring in, kind of wrapping people up and tackling them true, not just trying to hit them hard.
Jimmy, you might be impressed by Mr. Omarius Bryant then, because he had, I believe, his last 5 games in junior college, double-digit tackles in each game. He had 78 for the season at the defensive tackle position, including 1 game with 20. So if you're a tackle stats guy, then you and Omarius need to hang out.
Well, just a beast in the inside. And really, talking about that big game earlier that happened this week, there was no 5-star players in the Super Bowl this year, and the most was only a 3-star. So, like you said, Josh, it doesn't really matter about the stars of what the players are getting, but just really how they can buy into Coach Brom and the WKU program and the tradition that they're building.
You know, it's interesting to me, and the more you watch football, I think the more you realize the importance of it. The flashy guys, running backs, quarterbacks, wide receivers, are going to get the stats, the MVP trophies, and everything. But then you look at a recruiting class, and you see where the depth is. There's 4 wide receivers in this class. That's a lot, but that's just because it's Western Kentucky. But if you look at any recruiting class across the board, you're going to see 10 linemen, whether it's offensive or defensive, because if you can't stop someone or if you can't penetrate the offensive line, then you can't do anything offensively. You don't have time for your quarterback. And so I think it's worth noting that Jeff Brom saw the need for interior defensive linemen. And this seems to be flipping to a strength now because really young defensive tackles and defensive ends last year. Now they get another year under their belt, and then you bring in younger guys that they can mentor. So 2 years down the road, it seems like we might be looking at these defensive tackles and thinking, well, that's a heck of a group.
It really could be one of the biggest strengths of this team. Brom actually said in his press conference earlier today that he was making that a priority almost, that it could be really key for the future of this program to strengthen both lines. But also, I think that you need to look more towards like the secondary too. I think that needs to be a strength too for this team going later on down the road.
They brought in 3 defensive backs, 2 from the Louisville area in Jordan Gonzalez, and another one from the Louisville area in Aldwin Jackson. The problem with cornerbacks, though, is generally a cornerback is a skinny athlete by trade as far as coming into college, not necessarily coming out of college. Generally, the defensive back position needs to put on a little bit of weight. That's not necessarily true from our friend from Pahokee, Florida, Mr. Jason Johnson, sitting at 6 foot 195. That guy could guard any receiver right now, and so I wonder if there's any of those 3 cornerbacks that can make an immediate impact. Might be Jason Johnson, because Ricky Brumfield was talking, and WKU Sports did this video series where as soon as a recruit came in, they'd talk to the position coach. And Ricky Brumfield said he's an athletic freak in Jason Johnson, and you know, a lot of times they'll say, oh, he's athletic, he's got moves, he's got good footwork, but when a coach says an athletic freak, there's a little bit more to that, and he looks like the only defensive back from this group that is size-wise ready to make an impact this season.
Well, we saw a big impact last season from a freshman recruit, Wonderful Terry, so it is something that WKU...
Well, Wonderful Terry was a junior college guy.
Well, right, but it was his first year with WKU. It's kind of the same mantra of WKU, first year at WKU, but it does take a little bit of time for cornerbacks to find some success, a little bit different than defensive linemen where they can use almost more athletic or raw ability to just kind of get to the quarterback or stop runs. But, you know, we could definitely see, especially from Johnson, from Florida, just like you talked about, Jimmy Petrino, keeping with the pipeline from the Florida State.
I was able to watch some of the videos of Jason Johnson on the internet today, and I was so impressed. The internet, it's this new thing. I don't know. Just found it out earlier. But I was so impressed.
Times, Bill or Jim?
I was so impressed with how powerful he was. He was playing wide receiver in high school as well. He was both defensive and offensive player. Great hands, and I was just surprised at how powerful he was, able to push people around. I'm excited to see what he can bring.
Yeah, one of the things that really, I think, makes an intriguing defensive back prospect is when they do that two-way thing, where it's wide receiver safety. A lot of times that's the coupling, or it's, you know, running back linebacker or offensive defensive line. When you're a wide receiver and safety, then that gives you a little bit more of a notion where the ball's going, how the ball flies in the air, how to track a ball. And so for a guy in Jason Johnson who's looks like a decent size for either free or strong safety, you could put, 20 pounds on him, 30 pounds on him, and make him, a slightly bigger linebacker, or you could play him at free. I think just that a little bit more intriguing that he played wide receiver in high school. Another name on this list that's not really getting too much publicity right now because he was an early enrollee is Marcus Trigg, the guy from Glasgow, the only running back commit in this class, and it really just continues this depth of they seem to hit on guys and they only need one in a class in running backs. Got Leon Allen. A couple of years ago, they got DeAndre Furby and DeAndre Ferris. One was tabbed as an athlete, but this running back position for WKU is not going anywhere.
And it almost seems like a legacy now for WKU in the running back position. It goes down for Bobby Rainey, then to Antonio Andrews, and then Leon Allen. And Leon Allen will have one final season, and then he'll pass the ball. Or he's going to pass on the torch to another running back. And it just may be that Marquise Trigg is going to be the next one in that line of running backs for WKU. Just another a good little pickup from Brom. It's not really spectacular.
And Leon Allen, but Allen was unranked coming out of high school. I was looking at past recruiting classes to kind of compare this one to, and Leon Allen was unranked coming out of high school. And so that is the trouble with this level of football, because when you go up to even just like Big Ten conference and above, the guys that they are recruiting are getting more TV time. Now, Coach Brom and some of the position coaches were saying that that's really the only reason they are ranked better, but that's not. The reason that they're getting recruited by SEC schools and not Conference USA and Sunbelt schools is because of their talent, and then they get more publicity because of that. And then so I think that some 2- or 1-star players can kind of get lost in the fold, maybe because they don't play in just a really, really good high school that's nationally prominent. And maybe that happens with some of these guys. Maybe that happened with Leon Allen, where he's probably, if he he were coming out of high school now, he's a 3 or 4 star running back because of his talent. And I wonder if Marquez Trigg is the same from Glasgow.
Yeah, and it helps a lot with the way that they fit in with the offensive scheme. I think Coach Brahms' passing attack and helping out with the running backs is really good for running backs. Leon Allen really succeeded in that. And we're not going to say Leon Allen's the best running back in college football, but he did post stats that he could argue that he had some of the best stats in college football, with breaking the rushing record for WKU in the game against, I believe it was Army.
The biggest thing for Leon Allen this past year was he knew his role. He wasn't going to be the go-to player on the offense. It was going to be Brandon Doughty in the receiving corps. But he knew his role, and he was able to work within that role. And I think that that's going to be one of the biggest things for this trend of running backs. They need to be able to know their role, because 4 wide receivers in this recruiting class.
God,
the wide
I wish we had some WWE sound. Know your role. No one wrestling fans?
No, don't watch wrestling,
okay,
Josh.
For young kids, I'm sorry. Continue, Jimmy.
4 wide receivers in this recruiting class. That's going to be the emphasis for WKU in the coming years. The running backs just need to kind of figure out what they're going to do, and Leon Allen has done a great job of fitting into the scheme, and that's why he's succeeding.
Well,
and
even
I think
with just fitting in, he had 1,600 yards, and so this system runs so many plays that even if a running back gets a third of the offensive plays, he gets 25 carries, and so I think that's a plus for running backs. You can touch the ball 10 times out of the backfield, 25 times on the ground, and get some yards. Jimmy, you bring up the wide receivers. Got a question on Twitter from Matt Coleman. 4 years from today, which WKU football signee will have the biggest impact on the Hill? And I have to look at those wide receivers because they are already the size of Conference USA wide receivers. Both of them 6'3", 200 pounds, and Andre Thomas Cobb and Quinn Jernigan. And when you're 6'3", 200 pounds, and your name's Jared Dangerfield, you had a pretty good success with Brandon Doughty. And so bringing in 2 more of those size guys to go along and be able to learn from a guy like Dangerfield in a year and even probably get bigger. And it looks to me, because no really tight ends coming in this class, Nick Coffey is tabbed as a defensive lineman. He played tight end in high school. But I think that over the next 4 years, we will see this WKU team have a bunch of slot receivers and then a bunch of guys that look like Jared Dangerfield that are tight end size playing on the outside.
Well, WKU was able to get some of these bigger receivers and more talented is because of the attraction of this offense from Coach Brom. They like the offense. They see how many points WKU scores. They score 66 against Marshall and breaking records. They see, and they want to be a part of that, and that's why they're coming in. I think Jerningham has the biggest impact immediately. That's what we were talking about, Jimmy, before the show. 6'3", 194 pounds. I mean, I would kill to be that size and be able to go back to high school and just be able to make a D1 program.
Guys, gentleman that knows a little bit more about this than we do, joining us here on the program, Mr. Chad Bishop, college insider for WBKO.com. And Chad, what have you been up to today?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I said, what have you been up to today?
Oh, nothing. Just your typical 6 a.m. wake-up call and business meeting at the TV station and, signing day. And day's still not over yet. Still going strong. Just your typical day.
Yeah, your typical day is 6 a.m. Chad, we were talking to open this up about the idea that the recruiting class is not really tabbed highly by anyone. 10th in Conference USA for 247 Sports, 8th according to Rivals, and only one team has less 3 stars in WKU according to ESPN. How difficult is it to figure out recruiting rankings in Conference USA or Sun Belt over the past 3 years that you've covered this team?
Yeah, once you get out of the so-called Power 5 conferences, your elite football programs, it's really a crapshoot. I mean, let's be honest, the 4 stars and the 5 stars, everybody knows those kids are beasts and super talented. But once you get below that, I mean, you could sign a 3-star who could become a Super Bowl MVP, and you could sign a 3-star who drops out, before the season even starts. And so that's kind of the challenge when you're at Western Kentucky's level. And, they've done a pretty good job here over the last 4 or 5 years, and really since they moved to the FBS level. I mean, look at the guys that have come through, the Quantera Smiths of the world, Bobby Rainey, Andrew Jackson, Jack Doyle. The list really goes on. So people, even Jeff Brom said it today, we don't look at the stars, and I don't think folks really should get too caught up in that as well. There's a lot of kids from this signing class who turned out to be very, very good football players who really weren't offered by any other college football program.
Hey, Chad, Billy Rutledge here. Looking at the second recruiting class for Brom, Do you think that this the recruiting class is going to be able, the talent they've added is going to be immediate help for this team, maybe starting the first 2 years, or a scheme based that these recruits have really come to for this WKU offense, or they really grow in?
Yeah, I really think it'll probably be much of the latter. I don't think a lot of these guys will contribute right away outside of the junior college guys or the UAB transfers. And, I say that because if you look at the 2014 signing class, really none of those guys played. So there's already 10 to 15 guys in front of them from last year who redshirted. So I think what a lot of these guys are going to do are going to come in and provide a lot of depth. They're going to come in and provide a lot of competition and practice. Maybe they'll see some time in some games where the score's out of hand. But I don't think you'll see a lot of these true freshmen play right away. I think it's more of a scenario where a lot of them redshirt, get big and strong in the weight room, learn the system, and really kind of fit into Jeff Brom's scheme of what he's trying to do. And that kind of goes back to the first question of being 5 stars, 4 stars, and being high in those recruiting rankings. I don't really think they're looking for those big time prospects just yet because they're still trying to fill up depth and get guys who can really complete the system that Jeff Brom is running.
Chad, as far as the number of guys in this class, 20, not particularly large, but some of the guys in this class are particularly large. Omarius Bryant at 6'3", 300. One of the early enrollees, Cullen Reynolds, is about Cam Clemens' size already and coming in as a freshman. These guys that have these big frames, and especially offensively on the line and then interiorly on the defensive line, are those the guys that can make the most immediate impact, even though there's depth at those positions?
Absolutely. It's a good point you bring up, like Omarius Bryant, Parker Howell, Cullen Reynolds, some of the bigger guys who already have that size. I think they will compete. It's some of those other guys that don't have the measurements who, you could see redshirt get in the weight room for a year. Some of the kids that we found out are going to be gray shirts instead. That's a whole nother year. They get to get bigger and grow, and kids they hope they kind of hit maybe one more growth spurt before they get to a college football playing field. So, they got some good size in this class, probably not the quantity of size that they wanted, but probably the quality that they wanted. Definitely some big bodies in there. And, there's no telling who's going to emerge. I don't think anybody thought Derek Overstreet would become the defensive MVP of the Bahamas Bowl. But you just never know when it comes to recruiting. Some of these big guys could play right away and really learn the system and make an impact.
Chad, Jimmy Stratman here. This is Brom's second year recruiting, and would you say that he's done a good job in filling the holes that this team that's leaving has left for him, or do you think that he needed to improve in other places?
No, I think he did because when you look at the current roster, it's very offensive heavy. They didn't have a lot of needs on the offensive side of the ball, and I know you're always projecting 2 or 3 years down the road. But even next year's team is not going to have a whole lot of seniors. You're only really going to lose Brandon Dowdy, Tyler Higbee, and Leon Allen, and some offensive linemen, and a couple wide receivers. So the big key still was the defensive side of the ball, and to look at all the guys they added on the defensive side of the ball, on the defensive line, and in the defensive secondary, those guys I do think will have a chance to come in and compete right away for playing time, and it's really going to help the depth on that side of the ball. Jeff Brom and defensive coordinator Nick Holt, I think they knew that, and I think you'll see that continue. I think Jeff Brom is going to have enough offensive weapons here the next couple of years who will continue to go heavy on the defensive side, kind of shore up that defense, and that will help make Western Kentucky more of a championship caliber type football program.
Chad, in your opinion, how do you think Brom has done? He's signed 19 players in the state of Kentucky over the past 2 years. I know you put that on Twitter at Mr. Chad Bishop. And do you think he's really done a good job of bringing the future of Western Kentucky to this campus?
It remains to be seen. Honestly, personally, I think maybe they should have went over some, after some more higher prospect guys from maybe the state of Florida, Alabama, or Georgia. But I'm not going to doubt, Jeff Brom. He knows what he's doing. He's been in this game a long time, and that was evidenced last year by the run that WKU made and winning the bowl game and being a contender in Conference USA their first season and his first season. So I think he knows the type of players he wants. The state of Kentucky argument, I can see both sides, but I think he understands the type of player he's looking for, and I don't think he really cares, what state they come from or what high school they went to. So I think to this point he's done a good job. Only time will tell, but it wasn't a situation where you pulled up a list of recruits and said, who the heck are these guys? No one's ever heard of them. I think he brought in a pretty good class this year.
Speaking with Chad Bishop, college insider from WBKO.com, and Chad, a name that's not on this list, a quarterback from Lexington Catholic, and Reese Ryan, tabbed by some people as the second best quarterback in the state. Where does Reese fit into this class?
It's interesting that young man would decide to come to Western Kentucky, considering some of the other offers he had, but then also to Gray Shirt, which means, what that means for people who don't know is it means you're enrolled at the school, but you're not part of the program. You're not on an athletic scholarship. So he's going to sit out an entire year. I don't know if folks maybe remember Corey Robinson from Troy. He did that. He played his final 2 seasons at Troy. He had already graduated. So it just kind of gives kids an extra year to learn a system or get big in the weight room. And that's really building for the future. I mean, WKU is going to lose Brandon Dowdy this year. They're going to have to find a quarterback for 2016, and maybe Reese Ryan, is that guy, because he'll join the program as a quote-unquote true freshman coming in that year. And I think WKU and probably Jeff Brom a little bit thrive on those kids who are a little bit under the radar. A lot of folks aren't coming after him, and Reese Ryan is one of those guys. I mean, the numbers he put up, the type of football he played, probably a little bit underrated. So I think WKU wants to bring him in, get him in the system for a year, and try to learn things and understand that he's probably the next guy to take over this program.
Chad, a couple of the early enrollees coming from Alabama Birmingham, and Jontavius Morris and TJ McCollum look to be slightly different stories. Jontavius, the size that he needs to be to impact early, he's got 1 season left. He needs to impact early or else he won't be able to. And McCollum, a little bit younger guy that Jeff Brom talked about. And it looks like, at 6'3", 205 at linebacker, could use some size and grow into a decently sized NFL prospect at linebacker. What's the story of those guys and how they fit into this WKU story after the closing of UAB's program?
Yeah, you touched on it. Jontavius Morris was certainly a big get. I mean, we're not talking about kids who play junior college football or maybe were at a prep school or even coming out of high school. I mean, these are kids who already played FBS football. They have those snaps under their belt. And they were on the team that came to Houston Smith Stadium last year and won a football game, so they know what they're doing. And Jontavius Morris is probably going to start on defensive line, in all honesty, and really clog up that middle and know the schemes and know the offenses he's going against. He's going to be a big asset. I think T.J. McCollum will probably be more of a project, maybe a second-string linebacker, could even move to safety over time. But I think they went after him because they knew he was an FBS talent, but needed a little bit of more size and someone they could kind of groom and work on. And then, everybody's asking about Shaq Jones, the young man who's not on campus and has not signed and not enrolled, et cetera, et cetera. But he's a big-time player, and all rumors are that Shaq Jones will enroll in school over the summer and join the team in the fall. And if that happens, I think that'll really make this defense into a really good one because he's a great linebacker, and he'll be a starter right off the bat. And that'll really help that defense in 2015.
Chad, you mentioned McCollum and Morris coming in and beating this WKU team at home. Do you think they're bragging about being undefeated at Fice Field before even playing a game?
I could think they could maybe talk some trash here in the locker room in January, February, and March. But over the summer, that'll probably end pretty quickly. And I think it was interesting how Jeff Brom touched on it early today that everybody already loves Jontavius Morris. And if you follow that young man on Twitter, he seems to have a great attitude and a really good sense of humor. And I think, it wouldn't surprise me if he became a team leader on that defense. I think that's, again, a really good get for that team.
Well, Chad, thanks for fitting us into your busy National Signing Day. I don't know if they're going to let you go into work late tomorrow and catch up on sleep, but if I need to put in a good word for you, let me know.
All right, guys. Hey, tune the TV to WBKO at 10 o'clock tonight, and we'll break it down for you.
All right, will do. Thanks, Chad.
All right, guys.
That was Mr. Chad Bishop, sports journalist at WBKO.com, covering Western Kentucky. And there's been a lot of fellows with busy days today, National Signing Day, and Jeff Brom was one of them. They also released the schedule here briefly. So Jeff Brom gets his schedule released on one day, recruiting National Signing Day on the next. And he even talked about it, how recruiting never stops. There's a couple of open spots in this class in case there's a transfer, in case there is someone that drops from a different university. And it's kind of interesting how in the press conference the coach goes, well, we're leaving open spots just in case anything happened. He's already looking forward to next year's class.
Yeah, it's just smart of Brom to keep those spots open. What if somebody wants to transfer to your school that has very good ability, but you don't have a spot open for him? So Brom staying ahead of the game, keeping a spot open.
Got to keep your doors open in this game. There's so many people out there with such good abilities that could be completely underrated, and now you just got to make sure that you're keeping a spot for them.
A final thought on the recruiting thing we didn't get to touch on. 7 of the recruits that WKU got in this signing day, they didn't have other offers. WKU was the only offer from them. I pose a question to both of you that do you think it's just that was not good pickups by WKU, or is that just the trend that they're going on?
The fact that they weren't offered, I think that a big part of that is Kentucky is not nationally known as a recruiting base. Alabama is known as a recruiting base. Florida is known as a recruiting base. There's a similar stigma in Tennessee. It's funny how, Arkansas, Alabama, Mississippi, the Carolinas, Florida, Ohio, these are all known as recruiting bases, but the 2 states in the middle of all of those are not. And so I think part of that is because, Billy, me and you have driven out to do play-by-play here in Kentucky. It'll take us an hour and a half to get some of these schools. It's not concentrated. Even the big hubs, there's Lexington and Louisville. Outside of that, Bowling Green's got some talent down here, but it's not really this big city, whereas some of these Carolinas, Florida has tons of big cities where the recruiting base is so concentrated. It's easier to evaluate talent than it is to drive out to Monroe County to look at their offensive line.
So exposure is what are you
I think
getting
that's
at?
part of it. I don't think exposure takes you from a 2-star to a 5-star. I think exposure takes you from a 1-star to a 2-star, maybe a 2 to a 3. Like, it bumps you up because people can see you play.
I think another thing is this WKU team has been focused in the past years on development, not really bringing in these top-ranked recruits at the start, but developing players along the way. And so these players that are not really getting touted, not really getting a lot of offers, they're signing them, developing them, and turning them into great players.
That's an interesting strategy. How often do you guys think – well, actually, we'll pose this question, go to break, come back and answer it. My question for you to think about, guys, how often do you think coaches take slightly less rated players because they know they're more willing to redshirt for a year and they can develop them into a better player? So think about that. We're going to take a break here on RedZone Radio. Come back, answer that, talk about schedule and more. You're listening to WKU RedZone on Revolution 91.7.
Keeping you up to date on Western Kentucky sports, you're in the Red Zone right here on Revolution 91.7.
I get knocked down, but I get up again. They're never gonna keep me down. I get knocked down.
Back here in the Red Zone on Revolution 91.7. Josh Holland, Billy Rutledge, Jimmy Stratman here on Revolution 91.7. We just talked a whole bunch of recruiting, and recruiting paves the way for on-field talent. Speaking of that, the schedule released earlier this week, and got some interesting games playing at Vanderbilt, at LSU. Get to host Marshall this season after one of the more exciting games that I've seen in any football game at any football level.
It was all right.
At any football game, at any football level, at Marshall with that 67-66 win. And they get to host them at the end of the season again. And you're looking at this schedule, it's another year where you're thinking WKU could go 11-1, but it seems like every year I go into the year thinking they could go 11-1, and then it's 7-5, 8-4.
Right. I looked at the schedule immediately and I thought 11-1, 10-2, just around that range. But if you go a little bit in depth or look, WQ's got some tough games versus Louisiana Tech. It's only the second game of the year, the first home game. You don't know how the team's going to be gelling. The offense at times was stifled some in the first season under Brum, so they may not be clicking at all for that LA Tech game. They go at Indiana, who isn't the biggest biggest powerhouse in the Big Ten, but they could road games are always difficult. At LSU is a very tough game, Death Valley. And just like the Marshall game, and they have versus Florida Atlantic and at FIU near the end of the season. So there's a lot of tough games. The first thought is maybe around 11-1, 10-2, but the more I think about it, I think 9-3. But that's only one more game dropping.
As I've been looking at this, I immediately could pick out games where I was 90% sure WKU would win. Some of those including North Texas, Old Dominion, Rice.
90% they win at Old Dominion?
I think so.
That's a bold prediction.
I think so. If
Old Dominion is losing Taylor Heineke 7,500 yards and 63 touchdowns over the past 2 years, which brings up an interesting point. There's a lot of teams on the schedule that are losing over 3,000 yards passers. Old Dominion loses Taylor Heineke. Louisiana Tech is losing Cody Sockel. Vanderbilt's top quarterbacks aren't great. Rice brings back their quarterback, but Marshall's losing Rakeem Cato, 4,000 yards passing, and Indiana's losing their senior starting quarterback. And if you look at that, WKU should be in that list. WKU should be on that list of losing a 3,000-plus yard passer, but because of loopholes, they're bringing back Brandon Doughty, which makes them, instead of a team that is trying to find themselves going into next season, they're a team that is going to take advantage of teams that are trying to find themselves.
It almost catapults them up the rankings, makes them look like they are the better team.
I think it's probably 2 more wins. I think it's a difference between 7-5 and 9-3 on the season, because I don't doubt that a similar situation as this year came where they would pick up stride coming into the late part of the season, but I don't think that they beat Vanderbilt or even Indiana. The fact remains, Illinois wasn't some big Big Ten school that was competing for championships, but WKU went to Illinois and played poor on the road. And that's the thing, when you have Conference USA and it's this deep, and then you play 2 SEC schools and a Big Ten school, you're probably going to drop one of those just because all 3 of them are on the road, and teams don't always play well on the road.
Well, how confident would you be if you had Nelson Fishback at the starting quarterback position right now, Josh?
I think if Doughty leaves, Parker McLeod's still here. So I don't know. That argument's weird you can make because McLeod leaves, because Doughty stays, but does he, or is Nelson Fishback? I don't know about that. All I know is that Brandon Doughty's starting, and I think they have an advantage to take, or they have an opportunity to take advantage of teams like Louisiana Tech, Indiana, Miami of Ohio, 3 of their first 4 games that are losing their senior starting cornerback.
Well, regardless, it's Brahm's second season. The offense is going to be even more developed and look even sharper. The offense is
Can it be more developed and sharper?
Yes, it can. They can score more than 66 points in a game. They can do better than the season that they had, especially in the early season when they lost on the road to Illinois. There was times where the WKU offense didn't look very sharp at all. And
can they? Yes. Will they? No. And
yes.
not because their offense isn't better, but the defense will be better. And the defense being better means they're not going to have to beat someone 67-66.
Well, it's not hard to be worse than what they were last season.
Yeah, but the point being, some of these games that they won, they had to score 66 points. Generally, when you're in college football, you're going to blow teams out to an extent. You're not going to try to score 67 points to win a game if you don't need to, because there's a general respect between coaches. They won't have to score that many points to win games anymore because this defensive line went from a weak point to a strong point this year. And I think that, yes, the quarterback's coming back. A lot of the wide receivers are coming back, running back, over half the offensive linemen, but they will not need to score that many points, therefore they will not.
Well, you say they do not need to, but, I mean, they still could, and they still might be able to reach those point numbers. The defense may be better than the historically awful defense that WKU had last season, but the offense is still going to make strides. They're not going to degress, especially with Brandon Doughty in his last year, Leon Allen coming back, and really the only receiver that they're losing is Willie McNeil.
Yeah, and Joel German, but this defense isn't going to be so good that it's forcing 3 and outs. What it's going to do is going to create longer drives. Quite often, WKU scored in 2 minutes, and then the opposing team scored in 2 minutes, and it was back forth, 2.5 minute, 3.5 minute drives. Whereas this year, it's going to look more like 2.5 minute drive by WKU, and then a 4.5 minute for a field goal by the other team.
Well, the offense could score less points, but still make strides and still become a better offense.
Yeah, but I believe
more efficient.
I can argue you're more
efficient.
efficient.
Well, yes,
but. What was if I remembered your original statement about the offense, I thought it had to do with points.
I probably said something in the beginning that made you angry, and then we kind of went off topic about
Just
it.
looking at you makes me angry.
Well, that's just a given. RedZone listeners who listened to the last 10 minutes of the show last Wednesday would know about our history of me and Josh being angry at each other.
So we're talking about efficiency then. So maybe they don't beat teams 67-66, but is there a larger margin of victory last year than there was this year?
Yes.
Or are we still seeing these games that come down like FAU did, like Old Dominion did, like Marshall did, like all these games did, like MTSU did in double overtime? Are we still seeing these close overtime or 3-point games, or is WKU consistently winning by 10?
I think we're seeing still some of those close overtime games, but not as many this year. I think that the defense is going to become better. They've been gelling, they've been working. Most of the defense is returning for this year. The defensive line is becoming better this year. I think that the defense steps up, and like you said, they bend when they're on the field. They may force a field goal. It'll be a 4-minute drive. WKU comes on, scores some points. I don't think that we're going to see a whole lot of really close games, but there are going to be a few. I think that WKU will start winning by a larger margin earlier this year.
I'm most intrigued. I think there's about 3 games 2 of them are against teams from the Southeastern Conference. One is at Vanderbilt because I have no clue what Vanderbilt's going to do.
That's the season opener.
No one has any clue who's going to be the starting quarterback. They had 3 guys that passed for like 400 yards, which is not good for a starting cornerback in a season. It's pretty darn good in a game, unless you're Brandon Doughty, then that's an average performance. But you have no clue what Vanderbilt's going to be like. Their defense might be okay, but offensively, you just do not know. LSU is a perennial powerhouse. It's at LSU in Baton Rouge where they are tough, but LSU's on a downswing as a program. LSU's been not LSU lately, and even when LSU was a top 10 team consistently, WKU went in 4 years ago
and
competed at halftime. And then a year later, they went to Alabama, and it was a 35-0 ball game, but it was not a 35-0 ball game because WKU was down 7-0 in Alabama's 35, turned it over. Then they get to the 50, turn it over. And so this was a team, yardage-wise, if you take away a turnover or two, it's probably more like a 24-14 game. So this team inches closer, and you throw Tennessee out the window because that 5 turnovers in 6 plays is a fluke. But I'm really intrigued to see what this team does after being together for the larger part of 16, 17 months with this offense against that defense in LSU.
Well, it's a very interesting season. WKU second in Conference USA. WKU winning off their first FBS bowl victory. How good is this football program going to get, and what aspirations are they going to reach? And this is where they actually see where they're at, and with household names, at Vanderbilt with James Franklin, who's a great coach, and see how they do against them. At LSU, Death Valley, one of the hardest places to play. WKU getting a little under $1 million to play there. They're getting paid to play there, and they might have a shot of upsetting the Tigers. That would be quite a story. And just let's see how this team finally does with some pressure.
I'm going to be excited to watch the opening game against Vanderbilt at Vanderbilt. Like you said, Vanderbilt's on a kind of a downswing. And as we remember 3 years ago, WKU, we beat Kentucky, another kind of lower tier SEC team at the time. I'd be excited to see what we can do going down to Vanderbilt.
Right, and Vandy's always a chance for the opposing team to have a better presence than Vanderbilt does. No one shows up to Vanderbilt games. I think you said 9-3, Billy, right?
Right.
Jimmy?
I'd probably go with 9-3 as well.
Well, I'm going to be really, really rogue and also go 9-3. I think they lose one conference game at Rice. Rice returns a starting cornerback in Dreyfus Jackson, who had 2,800 yards passing, 400 yards rushing. And they also return a couple running backs. Maybe MTSU. MTSU has a way in football. Just like sometimes WKU had a way in basketball to beat Middle Tennessee, but 3 years ago, Middle Tennessee was not very good. They beat WKU. Last year, Middle Tennessee was a little bit less than WKU. They beat WKU. I'm really intrigued by that Middle Tennessee game as well. So we're all being really, really, really controversial and picking 9-3 together for next season. So you're welcome for that. We've got a little bit left here in this show. We're going to come back and talk a little bit of WKU basketball and a little bit of a bowl that was super here on RedZone Radio on Revolution 91.7.
Talking all things Tapper sports, you're listening to Red Zone on Revolution 91.7.
Welcome back into the Red Zone here on Revolution 91.7. Josh Allen joined by Billy Rutledge and Jimmy Stratman. We talked a whole lot of football in February, which makes me really, really pleased to be here on the mic. But Billy, we've got a couple games coming in to Bowling Green this week, and a couple games that WKU should win by double digits, possibly even by 20. But the thing about WKU is when you think they should do something, it doesn't always happen.
They play down to their competition. And with North Texas, who's 9-11 and 3-5 in Conference USA, and Rice coming in at 6-14, it just seems like two teams at the time with WKU tied for first place that they should take care of business. But it just seems that sometimes the WKU just waits a little bit too long to put that press defense on, just waits a little bit too long to hit a few three-pointers and get hot from beyond the arc. And but I will give credit to the WKU basketball team this year. They have pulled out a lot of victories this year. They've had 2 overtime wins. They've beaten UTEP at home. They had a very close game against Louisville. I mean, this team seems a little bit different than in years past. It just seems like a team that when it gets down to clutch time, I think this team's going to pull it out instead of maybe a game WKU loses in years past.
And when you look at what they're coming into this North Texas game doing, one slip up against Louisiana Tech, but they've been winning. They've been winning a lot, and they've been playing like a team so far earlier this year.
I'm not
Price finally back with 30 points against
TJ is
Southern
stepping
Miss. Thanks for coming back, Price. I know he's been injured with both ankles have been injured.
Well, I mean, he's been injured and he was in foul trouble the last game that they were at Homes, and he scored 15 points in the second half against UTSA. So
right. I'm just saying stars need to play like stars, though. So
but
thank you for coming back, TJ.
This team has a bunch of consistent players. TJ Price is a consistent 17 points. In years past, he was a 30-point guy or a 5-point guy. That's not TJ Price anymore. It happened one time this weekend. But don't expect Price to be dropping 25. That's just not his game anymore. He's a lot more efficient.
Well, he needs to be. He needs to become an alpha leader of this team. Him and George Fant need to become two players that put up those kind of numbers if WKU wants to make a Conference
those
USA.
Two guys have become more and more facilitators, though. They're not. Neither one of those guys needs to be like. If you look at North Texas roster or Rice's roster, they each have two people that are vastly above the rest of the team in scoring, and then it drops off. That used to be George Fant and TJ Price, but that's not how this team works anymore. This team is top 50 in the country in assists with over 14 per game, and a lot of those are coming from TJ Price and George Fant. I believe 8 a game between those two.
Right, and a lot of people can get theirs when they're doing that, and that's what has been happening. But I'm just saying the games where TJ Price does go off for 30 points, the games where George Fant gets his double-double in the first half in Old Dominion, that's when WKU makes the next step. That's when they kind of look like a team that could win the Conference USA tournament.
I'll agree with you with Old Dominion, but TJ Price had 30 points against Southern Miss, and they only won by 9 or 11 against the worst team in the conference. That doesn't really scream dominance to me.
I wouldn't say dominance, but it was a game where maybe the team wasn't at their best. The team wasn't having the best game, and they were on the road, and someone needed to step up. And TJ Price was able to do that when his team needed him. I'm just saying the original thought was, thank you, TJ, for finally a great performance after he's been injured the past few games. He needed to step up. It was a performance that was needed by him after he was been injured the past.
Okay, I won't argue with semantics, but that wasn't what you originally said. But coming up, so North Texas and Rice coming in this weekend, and they've got 2 games that they should win. Like we said, the interesting between Rice and North Texas is that Rice started off 3-5 and then has lost 4 games in a row, whereas the only teams really that Rice has beat or North Texas has beaten in conference is Rice. So you're really playing two oddly matched teams. North Texas comes in not great at rebounding, and they come in lacking size, and so WKU needs to take advantage. Jimmy, North Texas is a guy down low who's 6'7", 182. By comparison, Trinity Jackson's like 6'3", 180.
You would expect WKU to win the Battle of the Boards during this North Texas game. We would expect a lot out of WKU this game. Wouldn't be expecting them to lose. Wouldn't be expecting it to be a relatively close game. However, anything can happen in basketball. But you'd expect, I'd be looking for TJ Price, Trinity Jackson, George Fant, Rostov to get a number of rebounds to win the Battle of the Boards. I'd be looking for an inside battle during this game.
Yeah, if you look down low for North Texas, it's 2 guys at the same height with vastly different weights. You got Jeremy Combs at 6'7", 182 and Colin Voss at 6'7", 240. And so as long as Ben Lawson can take care of Jeremy Combs, because those guys are proportionally about the same, the same weight, even though Ben Lawson's like 7 feet tall, and then George Fant he's just more athletic than Colin Voss is going to be at 6'7", 240. The big number for me is they're completely the opposite of WKU in the assist to turnover ratio. WKU about 15 assists to 11 turnovers, whereas North Texas is 10 assists to 15 turnovers.
Well, North Texas is a pretty good team. They beat LA Tech, the team that WKU lost to. And it really comes by Jordan Williams. And, Josh, you were dead on when really 2 players that step up for North Texas instead of a team effort almost like WKU has been doing this season. Jordan Williams with 15.8 points per game and 46 assists this season, and Jeremy Combs with 10.8 points per game and 6.6 rebounds. So the stats aren't off the chart, but, they had a good win against Louisiana Tech, and it's not a game that WKU needs to overlook. These are games that they need to take care of business.
WKU was talking about, and Ray Harper mentioned it, that against La Tech, they felt rattled. And I'm not so sure that being rattled at this point of the season is a bad thing, especially going into 2 games that you should win. I think that it's good to see La Tech at full strength, the team that you're tied atop the conference with, because when you get down to Birmingham, you want to have been able to know what each team is bringing, right? So let's say, WKU played half the season without TJ Price and La Tech faced them without TJ Price, beat them handily, but then TJ is healthy in Birmingham. I know that's not the case, but that's another cog that you don't have. And so I'm not so sure that it was a bad thing that La Tech handled them, especially at home, because I think it showed WKU that if they are not crisp in the backcourt against a pressing team, then they're going to get beat badly.
It definitely served as a reality check, I think, for this WKU team. Not having TJ Price was a big factor again, but this serves as a reality check. It gives them kind of that basis of what we need to do, what we need to improve on when we go down to face La Tech.
And I think a big reason why WKU was rattled on the road against La Tech was the defense. They got a great press defense. It was on the road. It wasn't the most hostile crowd, but, number one team.
And they're ridiculously good at home.
Right. I forget the stat now.
41 after WKU is 42 of 43.
Right. It was 23 in a row, I believe it was, when WKU lost to LA Tech. So, it was a really tough environment. They're not going to see LA Tech back in that stadium. So they're going to face them on a neutral court next time in the Conference USA if they do match. So it's going to be interesting to see, and I think that was a loss that they needed, and Jimmy was spot on with the reality check.
The team, we talked about this last week, the team continues to be a model of outside of that La Tech game, a model of consistency. If you look at the regular season leaders, they're both TJ Price and George Fant. If you look at points, it's 1-2, Price, Fant. If you look at rebounds, it's 1-2, Fant, Price. If you look at assists, it's 1-3, Price and Fant. These guys have been able to take over this team, but also give some to the other players. So Chris Harrison-Dox has his games. Trinity Jackson has his games. Ben Lawson has his games defensively and sometimes up to 10 points. But it seems like they finally meshed their senior year and realized how much they have to score, how much they have to distribute, and when to take it. And I think that's the biggest point from the Southern Miss game with TJ Price's 30, where you're talking about grabbing the reins, is like you said, they finally figured out when is the time. George Fant oftentimes is getting his points later on in the game because, like you said earlier, they're figuring out when their time is, and it just, I don't know, it seems like something a little bit different about this team than in years past.
Right, and there's not a consistent leading scorer on this team. It seemed like at the early beginning where Price was getting the most scoring, but Ben Lawson's had some great games. He's been sporadic, but that's what this team is, and that's what teams do. It's not just a consistent effort from two players. Like we talked a little bit about earlier, it's not George Fant and TJ Price anymore. It's the consistent effort of Chris Harrison-Dox hitting 6 threes to tie his record, or it may be Ben Lawson who has 6 blocks, and it's the most blocks since 2008. It's just this team is finding a sense of energy from the bench. It's not just the starters. And another player that we don't talk about a lot is sophomore Brandon Price. And he comes in, he's very cool, calm. He hits some free throws and can run the offense. When there's foul trouble between Chris Harrison-Dox or Trinity Jackson, he is a good option that Harper has turned to in these past few games.
Yeah, that's an interesting storyline to look forward to, is what happens in, the conference tournament when there's 3 games in 4 days, and either Trinity Jackson, Chris Harrison-Dox, TJ Price, one of those guys, God forbid they do, but goes down or he gets in foul trouble, then you're relying on either Avery Patterson or Brandon Price, both really young guys, sophomore, freshmen. It's one of those things that you don't plan for. Like you don't say, all right, let's run, Price, Avery Patterson with the first team for 2 games and see what happens. But it's one of those things where Price has gotten his minutes lately, and that could help coming on the season.
We talked way earlier in the basketball season about the depth that Ray Harper was bringing onto this team, and they're going to need it when the conference tournament hits, and if they do make it to the NCAA tournament, they're going to be needing their depth. And I think that they'll be able to pull it out. I think they got the depth.
And that's the next step for a team, a good and a great team. That's why WKU is near the top of the Conference USA standing. Is definitely the bench stepping up, and not just a consistent effort from 2 or 3 players.
The 8-1 in conference and 15-6 overall. Hilltoppers host North Texas tomorrow night. Rice on Saturday. 2 games that they will be favored in. 2 games that'll be interesting to see the crowd, because we've seen over the past few weekends they've had bigger name schools coming in basketball. You had your Old Dominion and UTEP one weekend, and UTEP people kind of know about. Interesting to see what the crowd is like at EA Diddle. Billy, I heard that you were part of a decent crowd last Sunday.
70,000 plus.
Just 70,000?
Yeah. It was,
most college stadiums hold that.
That's a little.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's not as big as Neyland Stadium, but what has 110,000?
102, 455.
It's around that. But what Josh is referring to, I went to the Super Bowl. It was an awesome time. I was in the end zone where the final play happened, the curse catch, the bobbling catch, and the Butler interception. It was just awesome, and had a really good time. It's something I'll never forget, bucket list kind of thing. You guys should go.
Can I borrow some money?
Well, the thing is, we actually got the tickets through a lottery, so it was just kind of luck of the draw.
All right, Billy. So you were in the end zone during the play. A lot of people are calling it the worst decision in Super Bowl history. Is that accurate, or is that because this is a Twitter generation that makes bold statements really quickly right when things happen?
Well, I could see both ways, but I definitely think it's a Twitter generation kind of thing. The first instinct maybe is to run the ball, but if you could look back at the situation, it's second down. Russell Wilson has played a pretty spectacular game, and if you actually break down that play, if the pass was a little bit better, it was just a little bit led outside, but it was a good play. The personnel out there, it was the goal line personnel for New England. So Seattle came out with their receivers and the goal line personnel for New England. So it was a good matchup, and it's just something that happens. Butler made a play for New England, and that was the difference. And he just really is an individual effort that changed the game.
Have you seen the screenshot of right when the ball was released from Russell Wilson? Because Lockett is wide open. He's wide open.
The screenshot.
And it's just, they pause the video. He is wide open. There's no one near him. And I think Russell Wilson was even quoted thinking, when I let that ball go, I was thinking, touchdown, second ring.
Right. And
he was that open. And so it's just an amazing play by a defender that probably shouldn't have even been in the game. And so if you look back at the storyline, the only reason Arrington was in the game is because they had to switch defenders on the wide receiver out of UK, Chris Matthews. Yeah. They had to switch defenders and put a bigger defender on Chris Matthews because they couldn't stop him with the size on the outside. So then Arrington comes in and is guarding a different player, and then he makes that play.
It's just weird how it works out sometimes. But what a game by Chris Matthews, though. Just change the subject a little bit. It's just UK from Big Blue Nation and just coming out there and having, 3 catches for 108 yards and a touchdown?
Didn't have a catch all the regular season.
Right, what is he even doing in the game?
I wonder how many minutes he played in the regular season. He's huge. That's what he's doing in the Super Bowl. He's just a large man, and I think that you brought up an interesting point, Billy. Everyone wants to blame the play caller and say there's the worst call of all time, but when it comes down to it, you still have 11 guys on the field that are also paid multi-millions of dollars, most of them more than the coach. And Pete Carroll didn't call a play where the offensive linemen were supposed to not block and Russell Wilson had to just do something crazy. Like, he called a legitimate play. People just disagree with the decision of run versus pass. You still have 11 guys that have to execute, no matter what the play call is.
I don't think the play call was honestly that bad. I think that Bill Belichick, the Patriots defense, and most everybody in Glendale, Arizona, thought that Marshawn Lynch was going to get the ball anyway. So passing was going to throw everybody off anyway. I thought it was actually kind of an ingenious decision.
Well, one thing that, on the contrary, to play devil's advocate, is you got Marshawn Lynch back there, beast mode, who's just been.
You're playing devil's advocate against yourself. It's fun.
It's really difficult to challenge myself like this, but Marshawn Lynch back there, he had 24 carries, 108 yards, and a touchdown.
Yeah.
And he's just having a fantastic game. He's been the star piece, besides Russell Wilson, of your franchise. And sometimes I don't know how you don't hand it off from him just on the 1 yard line or maybe a QB sneak, but it's just kind of what happens in the game.
My first reaction is decently similar to what happened at the end of the first half. Pete Carroll goes for it, throws it back shoulder, or gets Russell Wilson, throw it back shoulder to Matthews, left side of the end zone with 6 seconds left. If he bobbles that or catches it at 1 yard, they run out of time. But he's a genius for that. Whereas he tries to throw a quick slant at the goal line and he's an idiot. The line between genius and idiot is success. You could have the same decision. If they complete that pass, then Carroll's a genius because everyone knew they were going to run it. The difference between idiot and genius is success.
And Carroll loves to walk that line too. He really does.
He's a fantastic coach. Another call that reminds me of is Sean Payton in the Super Bowl in the Saints and Colts. I forget what the year was, but it was an onside kick to start the second half for the Saints, and they were able to get the ball back, and they were able to come back, and then the interception, which...
Yeah, if he loses that, he's an idiot.
Yeah, if he doesn't get the onside kick, the Colts are going to score again. They go up by, 3 or 4 possessions at the time. It's just... NFL is a huge... It was the most watched television show ever. So it's the NFL. It was just a huge call by Pete Carroll, and sometimes you win them, sometimes you lose them. But
yeah, and that's... You said if they don't get the onside kick, then Peyton's an idiot, but who executed the onside kick? The player. So the line between genius and stupid play call is whether the players execute it. And so I just had a hard time with someone calling someone an idiot because of a play call. it's so often there are this polar side or the very far polar side, and there's nowhere in between. Either you love the call or you hate it. Either you love the person or you hate it. Either you love the team or you hate it. And there's just so much gray area that people refuse to acknowledge.
I will tell you, though, that all the Seattle fans at the Super Bowl really wanted Seattle to run that ball after the interception. They really didn't understand.
Well, I'm sure
they wanted Seattle to win, so
they
figured.
really didn't understand why they didn't run the ball.
Hindsight is 2020 here on RedZone Radio. This was another week where we talked a lot of football, and we're going to have to hang on to that. We'll have to archive this video and listen to it over and over again because we probably won't be talking football again until April, which is oh so sad, fellas. But it's a good time here on the Hill for basketball. We're ramping up towards March. Baseball season getting underway, softball as well. So we'll have plenty of action here on RedZone Radio. Thank you for tuning in for yet another week here on Revolution 91.7.